Someone once said, the secret of a good sermon is to have a good beginning and a good ending, and have the two as close together as possible. I want to talk a little bit about faith and doubt, which can get pretty close together at times. We are gathered here in this beautiful room because Jesus is here. When we read and hear the gospel and stories like we just did, who can really explain the resurrection appearances without a hint of doubt? I mean, if we're going to be honest, it's pretty far-fetched, a little bit too impractical or intangible for me, you might say. He appears and then he disappears and he walks through walls, yet he can eat and he can be touched and talk. Well, I love the story of Jesus who came among us and lived among us and showed us how to live, how to be human, and then he died and he rose again. And it's amazing and it's a beautiful story, and it touches me deep inside, and that is what it's all about. Our human spirits long to be touched. They yearn to know and to see. Yet in our 21st century Western culture, we have little of that. We have instant gratification. We have the easy fix. We have more information and data. We have entertainment. We have buy one, get one free. Life is more than a four-door truck. Our 21st century culture does not fulfill that space that we yearn for deep inside. It was Andy Warhol, one artist, the pulse rate of culture, who once said, "I am a deeply superficial person." It was Dolly Parton, my favorite quote, who is now in her 70s, but long ago she said, "It costs a lot of money to look this cheap." Pop culture is superficial and consumeristic and materialistic. It is a lifestyle that may look good, but it's really cheap. It is those far-fetched, intangible, impractical ideas and dreams and stories that make life worth living. Our spirits, the center of our being, what the Bible calls the breath of the individual, right down to the cellular level, they want to be touched, engaged, and gripped, and moved like a good martini. It wants to be shaken and stirred. The word inspired literally means in spirit. And that's what Jesus did when he entered the room, the disciples' room. He lit their spirits on fire. And if we're not open, if we're too skeptical and closed-minded like Thomas, we can lose the joy. We can lose our inspiration in life. Most likely, the disciples continued to meet in that same upper room where they had eaten the Last Supper with Jesus on Thursday. Boy, it was over a week ago, wasn't it? They met in secret. They were afraid. They feared being arrested, listening for every footstep on the stairway going up there. They listened for every knock on the bolted door. And this particular evening, Thomas had put on his hat, and he put on those black glasses, with the fake nose and the mustache, because he didn't want to be recognized. And he went out to get coffee. In his absence, Jesus, who is now up to speed on quantum physics and the movements of subatomic particles, stepped through the wall and said, "Peace to you." And Jesus showed them his wounds that bore witness to the worst the world can do, wounds that show that the worst was overcome. His disciples were joyful. The victim is now the victor. Life does have the final word. Then Jesus exited stage right. Is that stage right? Stage right. Stage right? You know what I mean. About 30 seconds later, Thomas walked in with a tray of Starbucks coffees and lattes in his hands. "Okay, now who ordered the pumpkin spice?" he asked. No answer. He looked around. The other disciples, they stood there with their mouths hanging open. "What?" says Thomas. "We have seen the Lord," they said. "He was right here. You just missed him." "Right," said Thomas. "But it's true, really." Thomas looked at at those disciples, as if they were trying to sell him a used car, previously owned by a little old lady in Florida, who only drove it to church on Sundays. "Unless I see the scars on his hands and touch the wound in his side, I will not believe." Then he grabbed his latte and he went outside to sulk. In other words, I want proof. Proof. We live in a scientific age, and the scientific methods have enriched our lives enormously. The scientific method seeks evidence. It wants to prove and to test and to verify and observe and to measure. It basically wants to see and touch. But the question we need to ask is this: must all knowledge be reduced to the scientific method? Is all truth what can be scientifically verified? If you are a scientist, can you be religious? Are science and religion enemies, or are they partners? I say they are partners. They are two ways of seeing, and we need them both. Science takes apart things to see how they work, and religion puts things together to see what they mean. They complement each other, and science is great, but faith helps to understand different questions, like, why am I here? What is the meaning of life? Who am I? You know, the why questions. And aren't they the most important answers that we are really seeking? Science is great and it's all about the how, but it's not so good at the why. One of my favorite scenes is from a movie called Men in Black. And Agent K, incredible as it is, played by a guy named Thomas, has been neutralized, and he's working at a post office, and he doesn't remember who he is. And his partner, Agent J, played by Will Smith, comes to take him back, and he says, "You are part of a top secret agency that monitors extraterrestrials on Earth." And like the first Thomas, he says, "Right." "But it's true, really," he says. And his friend thinks he's nuts, and he throws him out of the post office. Just before Will Smith gets into his car to leave, he says to Tommy, "When you look up at the stars and you get that deep down feeling in your gut, you don't know who you are." And Tommy pauses and then he responds, "Okay, if you tell me why I look at the stars, I'll go with you." That, in essence, is what Jesus said to me. He promised to tell me why I look at the stars, and I followed him. And now I'm a man in black. The only suit I'll ever wear. When we had that blue moon a few days ago, or maybe it was a week ago, I've been on vacation for a few days, so I've just lost track of all time. But when we had that blue moon, I went outside. I saw it. It was great, and it was late, and I went outside, and I kind of walked around the front yard, and I was almost speechless with wonder. The big moon, the blue moonlight. And life's edges are not so sharply defined in its light. The boundaries were less distinct in the trees and the skies and the sounds, and it was almost magical. I kept hearing Cat Stevens' "I'm being followed by a moon shadow," or Les Paul, "How High the Moon." Look them up on YouTube, but not now, later. Do it later. It was a magical evening. And the disciples, they must have felt a little bit this way when Jesus had entered their room. In the daylight, we can see everything, and it's more analytical. But in the moonlight, that's where we dream, and we get a glimpse of the golden world, and it touches our spirits. And of course, we need both ways of seeing. When the great ballerina, Anna Pavlova, was asked after she had danced, what did you mean by that dance? She answered, "If I could have said it, I wouldn't have danced. Beethoven, when he played the Moonlight Sonata for a friend, once he played the piece, the friend asked, well, what does that mean? Beethoven paused, and then he played the first movement again. And after playing it again, Beethoven said, that's what it meant. Anna's dance and Beethoven's music and moonwalking were attempts to convey something that couldn't be more efficiently expressed in words. They are intuitive feelings, emotions, spirits, perceptions of life that transcend the power of words that are beyond analysis. Isn't that what faith is? Believing is not a hypothesis. It is a story coming to you in the language of the soul, to light up your being, to touch you deep inside, deep calling unto deep. When you live with eyes wide open, life is not cheap. A week later, Jesus appeared again in that same room. And did he go to Thomas and slap him up the head a couple of times and call him a doubter? No. Jesus showed Thomas his wounds. He showed Thomas what he needed to see. And then he said, believe. And you can trust that Jesus will show you what you need to begin your own journey to the divine. All he asks is that you believe, that you be open to this amazing, beautiful story of his life and his resurrection. Not to analyze it or dissect it or put it in a box and market it on Amazon.com, but believe. It's a very simple thing. Can I end with one of my second favorite movie scenes, and then I'll be done. When my father-in-law came to visit, we watched the movie The Count of Monte Cristo, where Edmund, for the hero in the movie, is incarcerated in Chateau d'If. And there's a scene where this priest digs his way, and he comes up in Edmund's cell. And after the shock is over, they become friends. And the priest says he was jailed because he was accused of stealing a pirate's treasure map, which he denied, of course. And then the priest helps Edmund figure out why he was in prison. Well, he was framed. All the while, as Edmund learns, he becomes more and more consumed with anger and revenge and hate. But just before, as they continue their digging, just before they can escape, the hole caves in and they rush out, and in that place, the priest is injured and he's going to die. And Edmund holds him in his arms, and the priest confesses he really did steal the map after all. And Edmund says, you mean you lied? And the priest answers, I'm a priest, not a saint, which I have used many times myself. And then he gives the map to Edmund, and he says, you got to use it for good. And Edmund says, no, I will surely use it for revenge. Then the priest says, one final lesson. God said, vengeance is mine. And Edmund replied, I don't believe in God. With his dying breath, it doesn't matter, the priest whispered. God believes in you. May you own your belief. Open your heart, your spirit, and your mind. Stroll in the moonlight and watch your world get bigger, because Jesus is in your room. And if you're struggling, remember, that's okay, because God believes in you. Amen.